Hey guys, I'm Nathan from Arms and Armor. Today I'm going to be continuing our series of investigations and tests into how specific weapons interact with particular kinds of armor. So recently I did a video in which I used a Norseman spear to try and stab through some riveted chainmail on top of 24 layers of quilted linen. Now, this chainmail linen combo is something that was utilized for centuries, right? It was a common technology from really like the Dark Ages, migration period, all the way up through the 17th century. Now, how much of the body was covered in chain and cloth varied over that time, right? In the time of the Battle of Hastings, armor over most of the body was chain or mail over cloth. Eventually, as we get into the 14th and certainly 15th centuries, plate armor covers more and more of the body. There's been this kind of idea among historians of swords that these changes, right, wearing that plate armor, were a reaction to really pointy weapons that could break the rings of chainmail. And I'm not sure that's 100% true. We saw that the spear didn't totally go through that chainmail. It was actually pretty hard to get through it. So today, I'm going to use this Arms and Armor Rondel Dagger. It's modeled on one that appears in a fresco from the mid-14th century. The blade is a foot long, has a nice thick spine, it's very sharp, extremely pointy for armored combat. So I'm going to use that to try and see if I can break through a link. And then I'm going to use this warhammer. Right? This warhammer is a bit later. It's a French piece, 15th century. But it's similar to a bunch of impact weapons that existed in the whole period when mail was in use. So we'll see what that does to this armor. Safety third. All right, here's the Rondel Dagger. It's on top of a heavy boxing bag on top of a table. I am, for argument's sake, pretending that this is my opponent and that they are either on the ground or that we've been wrestling. I'm just going to try and hit this as hard as I can and see what happens. Ready? Well, I got about 1/4 inch of penetration. Here's a close-up so you can really see what's going on. Two-handed. That's what kind of penetration I'm getting there. It's not going through. See how it's simply gone through that ring. It has not broken it. Of course, the dagger's totally fine. This is hardened steel. It's much harder than the chainmail, but it didn't break those rings. All right, that dagger did not go through. Doesn't mean it would never go through things, but certainly it's not easy to put even a sharp and pointy dagger through chainmail that's on top of this gambeson. Now there may be variations if you put the mail just by itself, if you have a different brand of chainmail, a different size, maybe they would break more readily, I don't know. But testing it like this, it did not go through. So the second test, I'm actually going to try and make a point about some of these weapons. So I've got a 1x pine board here. I'm going to put underneath this. I'm going to hit it with a warhammer. Part of the point here is that this particular combination of cloth armor and mail is really protective against getting cut or stabbed. What it's not very protective against is getting bludgeoned to death and getting your bones broken. And if we look at where plate armor developed to cover first, we see that it's covering your chest, your elbows, your knees, and your hands, areas that, and your head, areas where you have exposed bone, essentially, that would be really easy to break with an impact weapon. So I'm going to hit this with the spike of this warhammer, and we'll see what happens. So the hammer actually did make a little hole through the chain, and here is the broken link. Right, so it is a not riveted link. It was a solid link that is broken in half. Part of the spike penetrated part of this cloth armor, came through it a touch, and of course it smashed this board in half really easily. That would have been a devastating blow if you were wearing this stuff. Here's a close-up with that hammer spike again. Again, I'm hitting this hard. This time, we got another broken ring. The head came through a little bit, penetrated through the cloth armor and into the wood, making this a pretty fantastic weapon against this armor. So what do we learn from these experiments? Well, it's kind of provisional, but it seems like it's actually pretty difficult to develop enough force with something like a dagger or even a spear to penetrate through this mail. Even when I did that two-handed stab, it didn't go through. But both strikes with the warhammer broke rings and delivered an enormous amount of percussive force here. This suggests to me that the development of plate armor was at least partially related to protection from impact weapons, rather than necessarily protection from the kinds of sharp, pointy, penetrating weapons that were really common during the age of mail. Right? Obviously, there's a lot of questions around this. I'm not going to make a strong statement about this kind of causality, but I think it's suggestive, right, about how we should think about what weapons really are effective against what kinds of armor. Take care.